So this is going to be a bashing George Rogers Clark video. Okay, so overall, just give a quick picture. George Rogers Clark is like the great conqueror of the Northwest. He was sort of known in the American Revolutionary War when you were fighting all the British in the 13 colonies. He's over in the West, sitting there killing all these Indians and saying he's doing it for the American cause. But he's a fucking psycho, and there's a lot of psycho shit actually that American history fails to cover. So here's some of the biggest stuff that you'll hear, that you should hear actually if you have a good American history teacher. But the American Revolution had the Sullivan Campaign. This is where George Washington is just an absolute fucking butcher, scorched earth. Just a type of total warfare. Scorched earth, total warfare. Wipe everybody out. Kill every man, woman, child. Not even a lizard will survive in the desert. That's all the Sullivan Campaign was about. It was led by Major General John Sullivan, Brigadier General James Clinton. Extended systematic military campaign against the Loyalists. Let's see. Come down here. There's about the Iroquois loyalists, and they fought 3,200 Continental soldiers. And then after that, they said that not only did they didn't have any battles because they all ran away before the battles got there, but they would burn the crops, villages, chattels, ruining the Iroquois' technological infrastructure. And then they came into Sullivan's army carried out a scorched earth campaign methodically, destroying at least 40 villages. So 40 Iroquois villages are just fucking wiped out. Imagine something like that shit happen. Like you just hear in Kentucky, somebody wiped out 40 towns in Kentucky. Just some asshole, just some fucking, renegade goddamn fucking general. I don't even know any popular sort of military people in Kentucky, but say Brashear, say Governor Brashear. He just went around, and you think somebody would notice? You think somebody would say something? 40 fucking towns, so 40 Iroquois villages are wiped out, and this is in the heart of New York, where the Sullivan expedition has happened. So this is New York, New York City, New York State. It's almost like between California and New York, like which one represents all of America. And New York sits right on top of Iroquois land, just like Kentucky sits on top of Shawnee land, and a lot of other people's land, right? It's not just those are the biggest tribes that we know. But that's America, right? New York sits on Iroquois land. You had 40 Iroquois villages throughout the Finger Lakes region of western New York to put an end to the Iroquois loyalist attacks. Let's see. These massacres. So the survivors fled to the British regions. So not only did they die, because they were murdered and killed, but they would starve to death. They would freeze to death. Sullivan expedition devastated the Iroquois crops and towns, left them dependent upon mercy of the British for the harsh winter of 79 to 80. Major Jeremiah Fogg of the 2nd New Hampshire Regiment noted in his journal, "The nests are destroyed, but the birds are still on the wing." The expedition objective of it in the frontier war was, however, not realized as British and Indian attacks continued in the following years. So that's crazy. So basically, the nests are destroyed. The fucking, the reproduce, and they said the nits make lies. People use, when they start comparing humans to animals, that's when you need to watch out because genocide is right around the corner. So that's Sullivan campaign, Shays Rebellion. It sort of shows how it's not a real American Revolution. We're using terrorism, we're killing the Iroquois people, we're stealing people's lands, and they're fighting back, and we don't like it when they fight back. So then after, not only does nobody get any fucking voting rights, right? None of the women get the right to vote. None of the black folks, Native Americans, or white males who didn't own property or were under 21, they didn't get any. So the majority of the population didn't get any voting rights. So the American Revolution wasn't revolutionary for the people. It was actually very revolutionary for the aristocracy, so they could claim the British fucking authority for their own damn selves, right? To fight under the guise of revolution. So Shays Rebellion is a classic example of how the American Revolution was not a real revolution at all. Not in in any significant sense. So after the war, you have Shay, who's got he needs to pay his land debt. And he fought in the war, and now they're taxing him. And then the banks are taking the land; they're taking lots of people's lands away. So you had actually in Massachusetts a sort of a rebellion, is what they said. But you have actually people lining up, right? Old fucking military people lining up and forcing the judges to not fucking be dicks. So see, protesters. Let's check this out. Shut down county courts later months of 1786 to stop the judicial hearings for tax and collection. The protesters became radicalized against state government following the arrest of some of their leaders, began to organize an armed force. A militia raised as a private army defeated a Shayside rebel attempt to seize the federal Springfield Armory. So I mean, basically, it's warfare, right? It's warfare, but it's amongst Americans. So it's like, oh, who's right, who's wrong, and eventually they formed the U.S. Constitution. Came out of that. That's when they said we need more centralized power. So let's draw up the U.S. Constitution. Everyone wants to worship the U.S. Constitution. Well, the Shays Rebellion was for the people. The U.S. Constitution was written, right past Shays Rebellion. So to sit there and say that the Constitution was very much against the people. They have the Electoral College, which is in there, right? They refine the people's vote. So actually, we don't vote for our electors. We elect the electors, and then the electors elect the fucking president because we the people don't know what the fuck we're talking about. So they did a lot of shit like that. They protected the rich fucking aristocracy, and they put in a lot of elements in order to. The Bill of Rights didn't even come about until about 5-6 years afterwards, so we barely got our Bill of Rights, and they really probably didn't even want to give us those, but eventually we got the Bill of Rights, and then once we got the Bill of Rights in, the revolution was won. We got something out of the deal. So here's a book, Founding Myths, Stories That Hide Our Patriotic Past by Ray Raphael, and actually I have this book. This really cool book. It's Founding Myths. Okay, so this is America, the greatest country in the world, yada yada yada. So in order to cover that up, or in order to sort of carry that story on, it's good to like yourself, and it's good to be proud of good things that you've accomplished, but to be proud of every fucking bad thing that is any American in all of history has ever done. That's stupid, dude. I mean, that's just ridiculous. George Rogers Clark, a notorious Indian hater, tortured and scalped his prisoners. So he's a fucking piece of shit, right? We're looking at the founding myths. Even the Independence Day was on July 2nd, right? And then they said when we celebrate this, there should be lots of pomp and lots of fucking extra bullshit, right? So modern texts also suppress the true story of George Rogers Clark, a notorious Indian hater who tortured and scalped his prisoners. So he tortured his own prisoners and scalped them and didn't give a shit. George Rogers Clark, let's see if we can get a picture up of him. George Rogers Clark, he is known as the great conqueror of the Northwest. He is one of these, same people that actually are sort of, people sit there and say that he's a great fucking leader, but really he's not a good leader whatsoever. He went around murdering lots of Native Americans, and he didn't have to. He is credited, just like Polk and some of the other ones, for opening the country up. But this is one of the founding fathers. George Rogers Clark is one of the, probably the most important founding father because he's the most honest. Simon Girty is a white man fighting against the Americans because he thinks that they're just going to steal the land, when you have George Rogers Clark going around just stealing fucking land willy-nilly, stealing land, killing, raping, murdering, scalping, not giving a shit for anybody or anything. It's war, right? It's warfare, and so whatever George Rogers Clark says, whatever he says goes. So I was wanting to get some images of him. Because this is all just a setup. I'm just saying that the American Revolution isn't as great a revolution. It isn't. I don't even know if you could really call it a revolution. In some sense, yeah, but in a real sense, we didn't get a revolution. They was able to form the country, and they kept it together. And I don't know. The real revolution would have empowered the people, and we wouldn't have the problems and issues that we have today with the the class, the rich, middle, poor. We got a class divide, right? So there's an inequality that pervades American society, where the fucking crazy ass rich continue to get fucking richer and richer, and then the poor people just are at each other's throat, fighting for pennies. So I heard he was a tall, redheaded, actually 6-foot fucker. George Rogers Clark is. Here he's got, all this hair. Here he has no hair. Here he's grumpy. Who is this guy? Do we really know who any of these old fucking people even look like? They get these portraits and look like, they're painted, so they had to fucking be rich enough to get some painted portrait. And is that what they actually look like? Or is that just the artist rendition? Hell, it could have had like some weird ass fucking, just, I don't know, some sort of, I don't know, some blemish on his face. So that's George Rogers Clark, right? So George Rogers Clark is one of those guys. The great conqueror of the Northwest is what he's known for. But he was able to conquer the Northwest because he killed lots of Native Americans. His famous battle was going to the Illinois campaign. His famous battle was the Illinois campaign, where he goes in, marches over into the Illinois country, and once he was able to conquer all these sort of bases, which some are French and some of them just are Indians, but he doesn't give a fuck, right? I'm George Rogers Clark. I'm gonna go around just murdering whoever the fuck I feel like. And so after the war, they said that he was actually occupied on stolen lands, or did he actually conquer it? Well, he did conquer it. He took it, right? So if might is right, then fucking George Rogers Clark is a goddamn hero. And if might is right, you want to sit there and wonder why Israel's doing the shit that they're doing. Well, they did it because of George Rogers Clark. You have George Rogers Clark all throughout history that we brag about and say how wonderful and great, of a man this piece of shit is. So let's talk about some George Rogers Clark, okay? So when Clark captured Indians outside Vincennes, he and his men tomahawked them and threw them in the river, right? There's your fucking wonderful, there's your boy George Rogers Clark just tomahawking fucking Indians, toss them in the river like they're just fucking yesterday's garbage. And then he says to avenge the widows and fatherless, claimed afterwards, required their blood from my hands. Clark, like Sullivan, systematically destroyed Indian food sources. He allowed his men to plunder Indian graves for burial goods and scalps. So, what a great fucking dude, right? So this piece of shit, he's a fucking warmongering piece of shit, warmongering genocidal psychopath. And he's butchering everybody, and there's no fucking rights or prisoners rules or any type of ethics being implemented whatsoever. They'll sit there and say how, look at the natives, they're such savages, they'll rape people and kill this and do that. No, look at George Rogers Clark. This piece of shit's a fucking savage. He says, to avenge the widows and the fatherless, required their blood from my hands. So he's saying that the natives have killed so many people he had to have. And what he did when he killed these people actually outside Vincennes, because he had captured these Indians and he wound up tomahawking 4 of them. So he had scared the guy that he was actually coming up against, saying, if you don't fucking submit to us, we're just going to keep on killing these fucking prisoners in cold blood. And then eventually they submitted because, how can you fucking, deal with an absolute terrorist, fucking psychopathic terrorist like that? George Rogers Clark and a small band of frontiersmen who supposedly opened up the West. The authors of Harcourt's Horizons wrote, George Rogers Clark helped protect the frontier lands claimed by many American settlers. But they said, who defended the settlers? Who's the settlers against who? The people who actually own the land? And then they talked about how a lot of the school texts don't even talk about the genocidal Sullivan campaign, right? So General Sullivan, we were talking about the Iroquois, how he murdered all the fucking Iroquois. Well, the Sullivan campaign, shows that they will use fucking terrorism in order to steal Native American land, that it wasn't about, the American Revolution wasn't about freedom or any of the things that they were talking about from the British rule, but really it was just talking about stealing fucking Native American land. And then you're going to see the War of 1812 where the British come back, burn down the White House, and we're still trying to take land, right? We was trying to take Canada. We was trying to take more land out west. We're still killing Indians, and we keep on killing Indians up until 1973, 1971. They had the Second Battle of Wounded Knee, right? So this shit's still fucking happening. So let's see. Indian removals in Indiana. I saw something in here actually about... George Rogers Clark. I guess I could search it real fast. Just Clark. I'm closing this. Okay. So George Rogers Clark. He's a piece of shit. He's a murdering, bloody, massacring, psychopathic fucking piece of shit. He's a bastard. He's a fucking... I wonder what religion he is. I wonder if he's Protestant, because this sounds like Ku Klux Klan shit. Sounds like some maybe... old Catholic Church, massacring shit. I'm not seeing anything where it says he was... It doesn't even say he's any religion. Oh, this is the Illinois campaign. Okay, my bad. So let's go over here. George Rogers Clark. Anglicans. So he's a fucking Protestant. Of course. Of course. So George Rogers Clark, a goddamn fucking Anglican fucking Protestant, right? He's, let's see, here's what he's doing in the Revolutionary War, okay? So this is George Rogers Clark claim to fame. Why is George Rogers Clark so, why did he get his generalship? You're going to find out right here. So it all has to do with Kentucky, okay? So George Rogers Clark, if you're a Kentuckian, I'm sure you know all about George Rogers Clark and everything that he's done for Kentucky. I'm sure you do. Okay, if you don't, I'm just going to go ahead and explain it real quick. So, You have Richard Henderson, right? Richard Henderson, a judge, land speculator from North Carolina, purchased a whole bunch of Kentucky from the Cherokee in a supposed illegal treaty. Some people said it was legal, some people said it wasn't. I think people are just pissed off that he was the catalyst. He's the one. Richard Henderson is a badass, okay? He was there with Daniel Boone, and he got Kentucky basically started. If it wasn't for Richard Henderson, people wouldn't have reacted to what he had done. So Richard Henderson went ahead and got a big-ass tract of land, paid a bunch of money for that tract of land from a bunch of Native Americans, had a big-ass festival or big-ass sort of meeting with everybody, put the pen to the paper, and got a lot of the tribes to sign a lot of land away. So that's Richard Henderson. Once he made that deal, once he made the Transylvania Purchase, because that's what he called that tract of land in Kentucky, the Transylvania Purchase, or the just Transylvania. It's both, I guess. So the Transylvania Purchase, when he had done that, that's when immediately Virginia goes into fucking overtime and says, no, fuck you, Richard Henderson. Kentucky is not yours. Kentucky is Virginians. And the charter that the Virginians were talking about was that the one that the king had given to them said that they had land from where they were at all the way out west. So, I mean, that's, Virginia owned all of the continent of North America, if you're to believe their fucking charter. But fuck a charter like that, So they said, because they, Richard Henderson had set up that colony, immediately Virginia sets up the Kentucky County. They said that Kentucky is now a county of Virginia, and that's where George Rogers Clark comes in. So June 1776, the settlers selected Clark and John Gabriel Jones to deliver a petition to the Virginia General Assembly asking Virginia to formally extend its boundaries to include Kentucky. So in a way they wanted that because it was either we're going to have to do what Richard Henderson says or we're going to have some sort of state. So they go to the Virginia, some sort of state sovereignty, state protection. So they go to Virginia Assembly, General Assembly in order to get that. And when they're over there, they said something about like if you don't want to defend it, then you're going to lose it, right? So if you're not willing to defend Kentucky with your your weapons, then you can't claim Kentucky later on. And so, let's see, Clark and Jones traveled via the Wilderness Roads to Williamsburg, where they convinced Governor Patrick Henry, right, give me liberty, give me death, Patrick Henry, which is the governor, so he's actually the oppressor at this point. He's the one who steps in for Lord Dunmore, which we're going to find out, which we all know, Lord Dunmore's War, right? That's the first part of the American Revolution. The Battle of Point Pleasant was the first battle of the American Revolution. So Clark was given 500 pounds of gunpowder to help defend the settlements and was appointed a major in the Kentucky County Militia. Now this is actually something else that's fascinating. So Clark is only 24 years old, but older settlers, Daniel Boone, Benjamin Logan, and Leonard Helm looked to him as a leader. Right, that's not fucking cited, but who gives a shit, right? It's fucking Wikipedia. There's no consistency here. So, whatever, there's some, people are putting some efforts behind it. So, we can believe most of this. When Clark is carrying actually this gunpowder to defend the settlements, that's when you're going to see Chief Pluckey come into Kentucky and just start chopping people up. So, Chief Pluckey is, Pluck Minotee is just Pluggy's town from Ohio. He was assassinated, right, 1776. When Washington is crossing the Delaware, that's when Pluckey is crossing the Kentucky. And then when he destroyed the Battle of Trenton, that's when Pluckey gets wiped out. So Chief Pluckey is going to die. But he was right around Clark when he was getting all this ammunition. So we're going to learn about more of the battles and fights. He's going to kill so many Indians, so many Native Americans. It doesn't matter, Shawnee, Delaware, Wyandotte. We're going to see actually those three tribes, the Shawnee, Delaware, Wyandotte, and others from Detroit invaded Kentucky with cannons, captured 2 fortified settlements, and carried away hundreds of prisoners. So, there was an invasion in June of 1780, right? The British invaded and kicked ass at Kentucky and wiped a whole bunch of shit out. That says invaded Kentucky, the invasion of Kentucky. So, this is, George Rogers Clark is going to lead a retaliatory force that is going to win a victory at the Shawnee village of Pequea. So he's going to fucking, I guess, wipe out Pequea. That's sort of, what he does. Byrd's invasion of Kentucky. So this is like one of the most successful invasions of the Native Americans and the British. And who did the Native Americans and black folks mostly fight for? They mostly fought for the British. They did not fight with the Americans because it wasn't really a revolutionary war. Even John Adams, which is probably one of the most conservatives ever, said that it was probably 1/3 Patriots, 1/3 Loyalists, and 1/3 who didn't give a shit. So that's one third. Only 1/3 of the Americans, the colonists were Americans. Only 1/3, and that's probably he's probably exaggerating. It's probably even less. So it's probably safe to say it's definitely a civil war. The Revolutionary War is a civil war. Everybody's just fighting against everybody. All these different alliances, right? Walking down the street like civil wars, brother versus brother. It's probably something like that. But instead of sort of like tribes of families, but just more like Native American tribes, French, Spanish, English, and then even the English amongst themselves. There's a lot of shit that's going on in Native America or early America. So, Byrd's invasion of Kentucky during the American Revolutionary War is one phase of an extensive planned series of operations planned by the British in 1780. So, it said that it failed, but here's the British Shawnee Lake Indians, Captain Henry Byrd, Alexander McKee, Simon Girty is here, okay, Blue Jacket. Oh my God, I didn't know it was this exciting. Okay, so actually you got, they say Shawnee Wyandot, they invaded Kentucky in August 1780, and this is Simon Girty, right? This is the white man who deflected to the Shawnee side. Then you got Captain Alexander McKee and Blue Jacket, right? Who's a big famous guy, and then you got Matthew Elliott, and they said that he's a loyalist. So the fact that they side with Simon Girty, I like them. I don't give a fuck if they're British or not. They side with Simon fucking Girty. And I'm a Simon Girtyist, okay? That's my perspective for the American Revolution, is that it was totally lost. Simon Girty didn't win, okay? So Simon Girty, he's hanging out with these guys, so they get some props for hanging out with Simon Girty, right? Let's see. Captain Byrd with the force from Detroit was directed to amuse George Rogers Clark at the Falls of the Ohio. General John Campbell, 5th Duke of Argyll from Pensacola, after taking New Orleans, and proceed up the Mississippi to Natchez, where he was to be joined by a third force that descended the Illinois River and captured St. Louis. No part of the plan proved successful. Okay, they said it's all bad. They said none of it was successful, but they scared the shit out of everybody. They invaded Kentucky, had cannons, captured 2 fortified settlements, carried away hundreds of prisoners. Eventually, George Rogers Clark goes and just kills a Shawnee village, right? It was a fucking British, but let's just go fucking kill some of the Shawnees, right? Just for the fuck of it. I think he used the Revolutionary War just to, go around killing Indians and having a fucking good old time. At what is now called George Rogers Clark Park. Oh, great. So we named it after fucking George Rogers Clark. That's actually why I'm doing this thing, is because Skippakithiki, Clark County, Kentucky, is sitting right on top of Skippakithiki. Skippakithiki is the last Shawnee town in Kentucky and is located today in Clark County. So what happened to the Shawnees? They got murdered, they got killed, they got wiped out. Their town is wiped out. They're not named Skippakithiki anymore. It's named, I think, Winchester. And it's the county is Clark County, named after fucking George Rogers Clark. You even got Clarksville, Illinois or Indiana, and I think another Clark County with actually fucking Indiana, Clark County. Yeah. So I'm gonna take a break.